It's been quite a week. Currently, as I record this thought for the week, we don't even know who the next US president is yet, even though the election night was a few nights ago. And today is the first day where we are having to stay in our homes once again on lockdown for at least a month. Feels like just as things were getting back to normal, we've suddenly been teleported back to March and April, where we're not able to do as many things as we'd like to do anymore because of coronavirus. Someone suggested to me the other day quite aptly that it feels like a decade's worth of events has been piled into this one year, that 2020 is really what the 2020s should have been. We've had so much going on, so many different things affecting our lives. And I think generally this has led to a lot of anxiety for us. And why wouldn't it? I think when you look at the present and when you look at the future and you see the uncertainty that it's filled with at the moment, that quite naturally leads to anxiety because you can't prepare for the future anymore. You can't control the present anymore. People are unnerved by that prospect. And my question to you watching this right now is, when you take an anxious, sharp intake of breath, when you suddenly realize something's making you on edge, what is it that you think of that then gives you peace, that then leads to the exhale when you realize everything is all right? When you catch yourself worrying about coronavirus perhaps and lockdown, do you tell yourself that, I'm in a low risk COVID category, or, well, I've got good access to shops from where I live, or hopefully we'll have a vaccine soon and I'll be able to get one quite early on because of that category I might find myself in? What is the thing that gives you that calm after that anxious intake of breath? Because all of those things might be true that I've just described, but they are totally circumstantial things. You are putting your trust in your circumstances if those are the things that give you cause for peace. And if there's one thing that 2020 has taught us at the beginning of this decade, it's that our circumstances change all the time. How can we find any peace or security in circumstances that seem to always be changing? You'll never know what to expect. And how can you have any certainty or refuge from anxiety if that's the case? Well, I'm pleased to tell you this morning, or whenever you're watching this, that the Bible tells us three amongst many amazing things that speak into this situation of being anxious with the circumstances that surround us. You see, unlike the anxiety-inducing, ever-changing circumstances that we live in at the moment, God does not change, the Bible tells us. In Malachi 3, verse 6, read just that. I, the Lord, do not change. And the amazing thing about this God is that he doesn't change, and he's also ruling from heaven, as Psalm 47 verse 8 tells us. God reigns over the nations. God is seated on his holy throne. Now, we use words like this quite a lot, the idea that God's in control and that God doesn't change, but here's what these verses mean for our anxiety and for our changing circumstances. It means then that when our lack of certainty in our circumstances makes us anxious, when it seems like our circumstances are the ones calling the shots, we can instead look to God, and in the midst of an immensely uncertain and anxiety-inducing world, we find a certain God who is most certainly ruling and reigning and calling the shots from his throne in heaven. God could not be more different than the ever-changing circumstances we find ourselves in, because God himself does not change. And that is where we can find true peace. That is where we can find a peace above context and above circumstance. But the thing is, if we're honest with ourselves, still living in our sinful bodies in a sinful world, even when we know those things in the depths of our being, we still get anxious about things, even when we know these truths. So what do we do then? What do we do when you might be agreeing with me ardently watching this and thinking, yes, I know God is in control, but I'm still getting a bit anxious and a bit uncertain about these things? Well, that's where the encouragement of the Apostle Peter comes in. In 1 Peter 5 verse 7, Peter encourages us to cast all of our anxiety on him, God, because he cares for you. So when we're still anxious, Peter encourages us to cast our anxieties onto God, to take our anxieties to the unchanging, all-powerful God and ask him for help. Because he's all-powerful, so he can deal with our anxieties when we cast them onto him. But notice the second part of that verse, the beautiful statement that we can bring our cares and our worries to God because he cares for you, because he cares about you. God looks at you in the same way a good father looks at his child, and he cares for you. He wants to help. He has a heart for you. God does not want you to be anxious about the things of this world. Jesus says that as well in the Gospel of Matthew. He says, look at the birds. Don't they have everything they need? The Father, the Heavenly Father will care for you in every way you need as well, because he's just that. He's a father. So these two things together, God's power and God's care, should lead us to come to him always, to cast our cares and anxieties onto him, to take comfort in him, not to take comfort in the ever-shifting tide that are our circumstances.